Section 2 says, a kite is a quadrilateral with exactly two distinct pairs of congruent consecutive sides. Number 2, given quad kite with Ki congruent to Ke and It congruent to Et, one of the diagonals divides the kite into two congruent triangles. Draw that diagonal and list the two congruent triangles and explain how you know that the triangles are congruent. B. Draw the other diagonal and explain how you know the diagonals are perpendicular. C. Complete the following list of properties of a kite. Think about angles of a kite as well as the segments. Exactly two pairs of consecutive sides are congruent. One diagonal divides a kite into two congruent triangles. The diagonals of a kite are perpendicular. And then it leaves space for 4, 5, and 6. For this section, I am going to give you 10 minutes to complete question number 2 in its entirety. Talk with your table mates if you feel the need to. Go ahead and pause your video here. All right, the first thing I did was I marked what I knew. We were told that Ki and Ke are congruent, so I marked them with 1 hash. We were told It and Te were congruent, so I marked them with 2 hashes. Well, it asked us to draw a diagonal and list the two congruent triangles. If I draw a line this way, the diagonal KT, we have this line is congruent to itself, so that is by side, 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 the two triangles are congruent. Now, recall that if two triangles are congruent, all their parts that correspond are congruent. So I can say that angle E is congruent to angle I. I can say that IKT is congruent to EKT. And vice versa. I could say ITK is congruent to ETK. So I know that these angles are congruent to one another. So it says that we know that triangle KXI is congruent to KXE, and I created the other diagonal like it told me. And I know this by side, angle, side. Okay? Because we already know that these two angles are congruent because of corresponding parts of congruent triangles. Congruent. And this line segment is congruent to itself, right? So side, angle, side proves that this triangle and this triangle are congruent. Well, if these two triangles are congruent, I know that these two angles right here are congruent. Well, they also form a linear pair. So if we have a linear pair and both of them are equal, I know that they must be a right angle. Well, if these two are right angles, then that means that these two must be perpendicular to one another, because perpendicular lines are formed by right angles. It asked us to complete the following properties or list. It says exactly two pairs of consecutive sides are congruent. As part of the definition, it says one diagonal divides a kite into two congruent triangles. We proved that at the very beginning. It says the other diagonal of the kite are perpendicular. Okay. Well, we know that if we have this diagonal, it cuts it into isosceles triangles because these two sides are congruent, and these two sides are congruent. So we have an isosceles triangle up here and an isosceles triangle down there. It says one pair of opposite angles are congruent. Well, we know that if KIT and KET were congruent, then that means I is congruent to E. So those are opposite congruent. It says one diagonal bisects a pair of opposite angles. Well, we know that if this diagonal is drawn, KT is drawn, We know that IKT is congruent to EKT, so that means it bisected it because it created two equal angles. On to your debriefing question here.